This episode of Blues Moments in Time includes historical discussion of racism and systemic injustice in the United States and may include the names and stories of people who are no longer with us. We approach these topics in a factual, educational context, but listener discretion is advised.
From the Blues Hotel Collective, welcome to Blues Moments in Time, where every groove holds a memory and every moment echoes the truth of what came before. Today, we rewind the reel, trace the footsteps, and revisit the chapters that shaped the blues. Here is our host, Kelvin Huggins.
Welcome to Blues Moments in Time, the podcast where we dig into the rich soil of history to find the roots that gave us the blues. I'm Kelvin Huggins, and today we're marking March 13. On this date, we journey through a world in motion. Marchers demanding their right to vote in Selma, Alabama. A young British guitarist making a decision that would echo through decades of music. And the deeper story of why the blues, born in hardship and survival, became the beating heart of rock and roll. We've got cultural history, political fire, the music itself, and a look at the souls born to carry this tradition forward. So we begin with the cultural landscape, and on March 13, 1965, two worlds were colliding in ways that would change music forever. In Britain, the mod and blues scene was alive and crackling. London's Crawdaddy Club, the Marquee Club, the Flamingo. These were incubators where young musicians were absorbing American blues records with near religious devotion. They were studying Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Elmore James, and on the other side of the Atlantic, the creators of that music were marching for their right to vote. Just 6 days before our date, on March 7, 1965, peaceful marchers were beaten at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. What became known as Bloody Sunday shocked the entire world. And on March 9, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a second march to that same bridge. The nation was watching, Congress was listening. The Voting Rights Act was just months away. These weren't separate stories. The music that young London guitarists were chasing, the music they called the blues, was born from exactly the communities being tear-gassed and beaten in Alabama. Every note of that music carried the weight of that history. Now we turn to the political climate, because on March 13, 1965, the blues wasn't just music, it was testimony. President Lyndon B. Johnson was preparing to address Congress on March 15, 2 days after our date, with his landmark voting rights speech. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 would be signed into law that August, dismantling the poll taxes, the literacy tests, the systemic intimidation that had silenced black political voices across the South for generations. Now think about that in musical terms. The blues, Delta blues, Chicago blues, Texas blues, was made by artists who had grown up in that world. Muddy Waters picking cotton in Clarksdale, B.B. King listening to King Biscuit Time on the radio in the Mississippi Delta, Robert Johnson walking the roads of the Deep South, playing in juke joints for audiences who lived under the crushing weight of Jim Crow. The music those artists made, it wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. It was testimony. And on March 13, 1965, a 20-year-old kid in London understood that deeply enough to walk away from a hit record to chase it. Of course, no discussion of blues history would be complete without exploring the music, and March 13, 1965 gave us one of the most consequential moments in all of rock and blues history. On this date, Eric Clapton walked out of the Yardbirds. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a simple personnel change, one man leaving one band. But what happened next set off a chain reaction that shaped rock and roll for the next 50 years. Here's the story. Clapton had joined the Yardbirds in 1963 when they became the house band at London's Crawdaddy Club. They played raw Chicago blues, Howlin' Wolf, Bo Diddley, Sonny Boy Williamson. Clapton was in heaven, but when the band released For Your Love in 1965, a song with a harpsichord, minimal guitar and major pop ambitions, he was done. He left before it even came out. So what did he do next? He joined John Mayall's Bluesbreakers, the most uncompromising blues band in Britain. He picked up a 1960 Gibson Les Paul, plugged it into a Marshall amp, turned all the way up, and recorded one of the greatest blues albums ever made. The 1966 Bluesbreakers album, nicknamed the Beano album, is a masterclass. His guitar tone on that record, thick, overdriven, singing with sustain, pioneered that sound that Peter Green, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Gary Moore, and even Joe Bonamassa all built careers on. The album covered Otis Rush, Freddie King, Robert Johnson. Clapton was so good that fans started spray painting "Clapton is God" on London walls. Not exactly a humble response, but it tells you the impact this music was having. So here's your deep cut for today. I'm your witch doctor.
Your witch doctor got the evil eye, got the power of the devil, and the conjured guy. Gonna teach you.
A 1965 Mayall single recorded just after Clapton joined the band, before the Beano album. It's raw, it's urgent, and it was produced by a certain Jimmy Page, who was still just a session musician at the time, and who Clapton actually recommended as his Yardbirds replacement. But Page declined and instead wound up producing Clapton before eventually joining the Yardbirds himself, and then founding Led Zeppelin. There you go. One date, one decision, and the entire map of rock music shifts. This date also marks the birth of several figures connected to the musical tradition that we love. Born on March 13, 1939, Neil Sedaka, the Brooklyn-born songwriter and pop pianist whose work in the Brill Building era sat at the crossroads of pop, R&B and the soul tradition. His music was part of the same commercial ecosystem that housed blues and soul artists throughout the early 60s, a world where the charts and the church and the juke joint all fed one another. And born on March 13, 1960, Adam Clayton, the bass player of U2. Now, U2 might seem an unusual mention on a blues show, but their 1988 Rattle and Hum project was a genuine blues pilgrimage, and it introduced B.B. King to millions of new listeners worldwide through their collaboration When Love Comes to Town. Sometimes the blues travels unexpected roads. And finally, we remember. The historical record for March 13 doesn't name a major blues figure taken from us on this specific date, but the blues has always been about remembering, about carrying those who came before. Robert Johnson, gone at 27 under mysterious circumstances. Bessie Smith, taken by a car crash in 1937. Charlie Patton, worn down by the road and the life. These were artists who built the foundation that Eric Clapton stood on when he made his decision on March 13 in 1965. They never lived to see a young white Englishman walk away from a hit record because he loved their music too much to let it be diluted. We carry them all forward every time we put on a record, every time we listen. So what's the through line of March 13? It's a story about what you stand for, about integrity in the face of commercial pressure. On the same day that marchers were risking their lives in Selma to stand for something larger than themselves, a young musician in London was making a much smaller but symbolically resonant stand of his own. He walked away from the hit parade to chase the real thing, and in doing so, he helped ensure that the music born in the Mississippi Delta, born out of hardship and survival and grace, would reach ears across the globe and across generations. The blues is always asking you, what are you willing to give up for the truth? Eric Clapton had his answer on March 13, 1965, and the music has never been the same since. And that's all for today's episode of Blues Moments in Time. I'm Kelvin Huggins. Join us next time as we continue to explore the remarkable history of the blues.